Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining my presentation today. One second, I'm just going to make sure I can see my PowerPoint slides. If you give me 1 minute, I've lost my slides, so let me share them again, if that's okay. 1 second, share, and here we go. Hopefully you can see my slides. Okay, so let's start. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Vicky Clark, and I'm the Manager of Global Assessment Solutions for the British Council. And my role is to identify assessment needs within ministries of education and provide solutions for them. Today, I'm going to be talking about assessing speaking. Now, this is a very large topic, and I shall only be touching on really the surface and hopefully pique your interest to read more. So let's start and let me go through what I'll be talking about today. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to 3 really important aspects of speaking, and they will be developed throughout the entire presentation. The next thing I'll do is to really break down what speaking is. What does it involve? What's the theory behind it? How do we speak? And then based on what we've learned in that second part about oral ability, I'm going to show you the skills and the competences that we as testers, as assessors, focus on in our test tasks. In other words, what are we trying to measure or assess in people speaking? And then I'll give you some examples of actual tests designed for teenagers. That's what I'm focusing on today. So let's start with the introduction to speaking. Well, first thing is there are 2 types of speaking, if you wish, 2 ends of the continuum. One is planned speech, one is unplanned speech. Now, these are really important because they're very, very different. At the moment, you can say I'm involved in semi-planned, planned speech. That means that I know what I'm going to say. In fact, I did the slides and I've planned what I want to say to you today. I've done this before as well, this particular webinar. So you'll find that some of my speech has features that are similar to written language. You'll find that I'll talk in complete sentences, hopefully, that I'll use some specific terminology, and I'll probably use some discourse markers, some connectors that are more complicated than just perhaps an and or but. But on the other end of the continuum, we have unplanned speech. This is the speech that happens perhaps in a shop when you're buying shoes, or if you're talking to a friend in a cafe. Now, these will have very different features to the speech I'm involved in at the moment, and I'll show you those features later. But remember, there is 2 ends of a continuum, planned and unplanned, and obviously there's a lot in between. This is another massively important aspect when we look at teaching or assessing speaking. It is the fact that speaking occurs in real time. In other words, as I'm speaking, I'm also thinking about what to say next. I'm also possibly even listening to you and processing that. So there's no real time to think, and that's a really important element, and we're going to focus again on that later on and throughout the whole presentation. And the last thing I want to focus on, so these 3 really important aspects, is on reciprocity. Reciprocity basically means when there's 2 or more people in the game. At the moment, I'm just talking on my own, but later on, my colleagues, they'll be looking at questions, and they'll be feeding me some of the questions that you hopefully will write during this presentation, and we'll be having a little bit of a discussion, hopefully, and that will be this interactiveness, this reciprocity I'm going to talk to you about. And that changes everything. That shows here the difference between written language and spoken language is when we have this unplanned, processing in real time, and reciprocity. So keep that in mind. All of this will become clear later, but keep those 3 elements in mind. So what is language? What is all language? Well, obviously, we know that all language consists of words, vocabulary, not just the word itself, but what it actually means, the meaning of the word. We also need to have, obviously, morphology. In other words, words are parts of words. I'm going to give you an example to make it a little bit clearer. Let's take the word undercooked. This is an adjective. We have a root, the cook. We have a prefix under, which I could change to over. So I can say yesterday the chef undercooked my fish, or yesterday the chef overcooked my fish. And then I have a suffix. Here the suffix is the ed, which indicates past form. If I change that suffix to an s, okay, I can have undercooks as a verb form. So in other words, the third person, present simple, the chef always undercooks my fish in that restaurant. And obviously suffix can have multiple purposes. They could be grammatical, such as past tense or third person singular. In the present, they could indicate plural, etc. They could indicate a person, footballer, football being the root, footballer is the person who plays football. So there's our morphology. So when we speak, we need knowledge of vocabulary, knowledge of morphology, the parts of the words, and of course we need to know how to say them. If we don't have intelligible pronunciation, then nobody will understand what we say. Okay, so that's obviously an important aspect of speaking. And then of course we need grammar. We need to know how we put all these words and where the morphology comes into, those parts of the words, how they fit together in what order in the sentence, in order for the sentence to make, or the utterance to make sense. And finally, and this part often is neglected both in testing and teaching, is we need to know the pragmatics, the social rules. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, language changes according to context. Sometimes I have to speak informally or with my colleagues or my friends. Other times I have to speak formally, perhaps in a job interview. Sometimes I wish to be rude. Let's say I'm angry in a shop because, I don't know, they've given me the wrong stuff. Or I wish to be very, if I'm complaining, I wish to be direct but polite. Perhaps I'm talking to a child, perhaps I'm talking to the Queen, perhaps I'm talking in a library, perhaps I'm talking about a difficult topic. Everything changes according to the context, and we need to know that. So that's basically what all language is. Let me give you an example of a text. Now this is a spoken text and I've written it so we can see the features. It's between two native speakers, a female student and a teacher. Please note that these numbers in brackets, don't worry about them, they're just the length of pause between the two words, so forget those. Can you just read that and I'll show you some really important features of unplanned speech. I'll give you a minute to read that. Okay, so we're going to go back to the first slide. Let's think what I said in the first slide. Well, this is clearly unplanned speech. This is clearly happening in real time. No one's prepared this in advance, what they're going to say. And this is clearly between two persons. Okay, so that reciprocity. So let's look at the features. When we have all of that together, what do we get? Well, first of all, we get mistakes. And this is a really important one. These are two native speakers, everyone. Okay, so what we've got is the students started off saying, do you have any more? Now, that grammatical construct of any more would necessitate a plural noun, but they actually gave initially a singular. And then they reformulated, they restarted, they corrected themselves. Okay, that happens. Why? It's in real time. We've got a lot going on. We're listening, we're thinking, we're speaking, we're deciding what to say next, and these things are going to occur. Now, these are really important aspects of spoken language. These are fillers, and they play a massively important role. What that happens here is in these fillers, I'm allowing myself time, I'm giving myself time to think about what I want to say next. And you'll see in a couple of slides the model of how we speak, and you'll realise why we need these fillers. Just give me a couple of minutes or a couple of minute parts of a second to gather my thoughts, whether it be content or in second language, it could be even the vocab or the grammar. This is another massively important aspect of spoken language. This is what we call a head. Now we have heads and tails. I'm going to give you a lot more examples in the next slide, but just bear with me now. This is a head. What a head is, it's sort of saying double double. What I'll do is I'll copy another. Now, why would the teacher need to say something? That's like double. Why couldn't he just say, I'll copy another for you, wait a minute. But what he's doing there is first of all, he's giving himself time to think about what he wants to say. And also he's helping the other person in that reciprocity. Remember, there's two people. It's really important then when you have a shared context, you've got someone in front of you, you can see from their face if they're understanding you, but you also want them to understand you without too much trouble. So we have these strategies that help us. So we put some header. So for example, he's really nice, isn't he? That man we met yesterday. So I'm sort of helping you, giving you sort of the subject before elaborating a bit. And again, look at this, there's a mistake here. Now, perhaps, again, in that reciprocity and that real-time processing, perhaps the student's own error influenced the teacher's own error in the singular and then correction, or it could be just a processing. Again, these are not errors per se, these are processing errors, and these are natural errors. I mention these because sometimes when people assess speaking from their students, they focus on what I would call natural errors that I myself would make. Okay, another great feature of spoken English, unplanned spoken English, is this incomplete sentences ellipsis. I don't have to say, what time will you put them in the envelope, or what time should I come and get the envelope? We are in a shared context, shared time, shared space. Unlike written language, where my reader is not with me in my space or time, and I can't see his or her face to see if they've understood, and we can't have that clarification about, you know, what I'm trying to say, then I would need to be far more specific. But if we're sharing the space and time, and given the real life processing constraints, I don't need to talk in full sentences. And finally, these little words have, again, massive functions as well. The yeah here is probably just like a filler, give myself a bit of time to think about or to change the subject, or, you know, there's loads of roles that these little words play, but these little words, the words okay, are all playing the same function here. What they're doing is they're making sure that there's clarification, that you're understanding me and I'm confirming I've understood you, for example. And that, again, is because in real life processing, there are mistakes, there's errors, there's ellipsis, there's incomplete. And of course, we have this shared context where we can see each other's face and check constantly, you know, that everyone has understood, so we can carry on. Okay, let's go through some of these points in again. Incomplete sentences. Now remember, these are features of unplanned speech, and these are necessary because of the real-time processing constraints and the fact there's reciprocity, so we don't need to complete sentences. The use of simple connectors. Now remember, I'm still talking about this from a first language point of view. I'm going to come to second language in a minute. I use simple connectors in unplanned speech. It doesn't matter how educated you are. I don't need very complex language or complex connectors because it's a shared context in an informal conversation. Ellipsis, we mentioned that, you know, when you come in tomorrow, okay, I don't need to say I'm coming tomorrow, right? It's clear. This is important because of the real life, the real time processing. I need some time to think, and I can grab these ready-made chunks, these formulate language from my lexicon in my head, my little vocab store in my head, and because I don't have to think or process those words, they're chunks. So it gives me more time to then process what I need to process. And I'll show you that in a minute when we look at the next slide on how we speak. But they're really important. So when someone says happy birthday, I say thank you very much. Or if someone says it's my birthday, I'll say happy birthday. These are just formulate language, learnt chunks to help us to keep going that fluency aspect of language. We talked about the heads in that very short example I showed you of a speech in the last slide with all those features you can see in a very short text. And there were more, I just didn't have time to focus on them. But you can see here the film, it was really exciting. This is bad written style because you've got double subject, the film, it. But in speaking, it allows the speaker to sort of give you a heads up, if you wish, on what we're going to talk about, and allows them time to think of how they're going to elaborate on that. And the same, if you wish, with the tail. So these are really common features in native speech. And vague and informal language are a massive feature of informal, unplanned speech. Because obviously I don't need to be elaborate. You know, if I use my hand and point, I say, oh, give me that, or put past that, would you? I don't need to elaborate. You can see it. I can see it. I don't have to say, could you pass me that rectangular object with the, you know, no, that's just not necessary. This is important. When there's reciprocity, there's interactiveness. At the moment, I'm holding the floor. I'm talking, you're listening, no one's interrupting me. But in a reciprocal interactive conversation, then obviously you're going to interrupt me or take your turn or overlap, ask for clarification, change what you're going to say based on what I've just said. That's that interactive nature of spoken language. And of course, there's fillers and back channels. Fillers we've talked about, gives us a bit of time, but back channeling allows me to tell you I'm listening. So when you're talking, I do something like this. Yeah, okay, yeah, good idea, great, fine, yeah. Why? It tells me I'm listening, I'm understanding, I'm confirming that, you know, you can carry on. Because of course, in real life processing and real time processing, you're going to use quite simple, vague, formulaic language. So I need to make sure I've got it clear. And of course, these are hesitation slips, false starts, etc. Now, why am I talking about this? Because it's really important with lower level assessment of speaking, say at the A1, A2, B1 level, especially with children and young learners, and obviously beginner adults, that most of our speech here will be quite informal, and therefore they will include a lot of these aspects. And it's very important to understand that the task itself has to be very clear what you want from that task, and then the way you grade that task has to be related to what you want. I'll give you more details later on when I show you tasks. Okay, so how do we speak? I'm going to show you a model for first language by Levelt. He adapted that model in 1999 or expanded upon it, but his 1989 concepts, I think, are good for our purpose. Okay, it's obviously a much more complex model than I'm giving you, but I'm going to give you the main ideas. So when we speak, what happens? We'll talk about it in first language, then we'll talk about it in the second language. Well, let's say my husband says to me now, Vicky, let's go for a walk. Okay, now what I do is I'm looking out the window and I see rain. All right, now I know it's raining in Madrid. It's sunny. I'm in the south of Spain, so it's lovely and sunny here, all of those, so you know. But okay, you're probably looking out the window and seeing rain. So this is now a pre-verbal message. This is what we want to say. Okay, this is what we want to respond to my husband's, suggestion of walking. Next thing I've got to do is, from my lexicon, so from my little vocab store in my head, I need to access that vocabulary. Okay, and then I have to encode it grammatically. Okay, or sometimes we say decode, encode. The vocabulary is the same. So I have to then, okay, it is raining. That's going to be a present continuous to show it's right now. There's an ing form. Now, don't forget, for native speakers, this is obviously automatic, but it still needs to be encoded. Okay, it is raining, impersonal. Okay, fine. That's where I am. And then I need to add the phonological score, as we call it. So encode it phonologically. In other words, try to add not just I've got the vocab, I've got the grammar, the syntax. Now I need to know how it's pronounced. It's still pre-verbal. And then the last stage is me saying it. This is a physical. This is about your throat, your voice muscles, your mouth, your tongue. This is the articulation side. Okay, so in other words, you're articulating that language plan, that language score that you got. All right. At the same time, remember, we're listening. If it's, you know, if there's an interactive, we're listening to someone and we're doing the opposite. We're hearing what they say, we're decoding the grammar in our head, and then we're getting the concept. So we're going backwards when we listen. And as we speak, we're conceptualizing, formulating, and then articulating the next sentence. So all of this overlaps, the listening, talking now, trying to think about what I'm going to say next. We speak about 3 words per second, everyone, in native language, okay, normal speech. So can you see how much we have to do in that really short time we have, how complex it is? So let's take it from a second language and we add the massive complexity to that. First of all, I might not even have the conceptualization phase. I might not even know what to say. I'm not talking about vocab here, that's stage 2. For example, I have to be extremely formal. A lot of young learners know informal language, but they don't know, let's say if the Queen of England came to their class, they might not know how they would approach the greeting even, or what they should do. So even at the conceptualization phase, because of perhaps pragmatic, social linguistic, cultural issues, we might not even know that. And then let's go on to the formulation stage. Let's say we do know what to say. We might not have the vocab, the grammar, the phonological side of that. We might not know that. So there's an added issue there. So we probably have to go back and rethink what vocab we want to get and encode that. Okay, and then even at articulation, we might say it wrong. And even if we know that at the end of he, she, it, there is an S in a verb, present simple, we might not say the S and then have to correct ourselves because we have to monitor. There's monitoring all the way through these stages, if you wish, but the easiest monitoring for us to see is the one that when it comes out and it's wrong, we say it again. So look at the complexity of speaking we have. Okay, so based on what we know that oral language consists of, based on what we know about how we speak, what is it we're actually trying to measure or teach? Now, I'm coming from it from an assessment point of view. So in tasks that I design for speaking tests, what I'm obviously eliciting a speech sample, but what is it I'm trying to measure or look at in that speech? And based on what we've spoken about, it's obviously going to be about pronunciation. Now, remember, everyone, it's never about native speaker pronunciation. That is not a concept. It's about intelligibility. I speak many languages, all with an East London accent, but hopefully I'm intelligible in those languages and people understand me and the message is put across at various levels. Then there's accuracy. That's our grammar. That's our grammar. That's our, that's our grammar and syntax, for example. Then there's fluency. I'll simplify it. Fluency here, in this sense, could be about the fact that there's not too many pauses between words. I'm not focusing so much on accuracy that I speak this slowly, okay, which we know unfortunately happens a lot because many classrooms, because of sizes, cultural purposes, focus too much on accuracy. I need to know vocabulary. I need to see what vocabulary people are using in test tasks, whether it's correct and appropriate to the pragmatic context. Everyone. Discourse management, very important for long turns. Now, I'm speaking at length here for 40 minutes. That's a long turn because no one's interrupting me. If it were, I say a sentence, you say a sentence, that's a short turn. But in a long turn, I have to make sure my listener understands. Now, it's easy here because I've got slides, but in a lecture hall, when I've got 200 students, how do I do that? Well, obviously, I sort of say, well, I'm going to talk about this, then this, then this, and then I might say at the end of part 1, OK, that was part 1. Let me quickly recap. Let's go on to part 2. Remember, part 2 will be about this. I'll give examples during my speech. I'll say, remember, I mentioned something in part 1. Well, here again. So this discourse management, how we structure, if you wish, a long speech and writing as well, so that the listener plus reader will understand and follow us. Strategic competence overlaps a lot with fluency. These are all sort of overlapping, obviously. Strategic competence is when I don't have perhaps the social linguistic pragmatic understanding, I don't have the vocab, I don't have certain grammar perhaps. So what do? Well, either I can stop and search for the word for 2 minutes and then bore everyone to death, or I can try another word or paraphrase, or I don't know, perhaps say the word in my own language in case that person understands my language a little. There are ways and means I can carry on, keep going, and that's the strategic competence. Or perhaps, you know, if you're not sure about that, and again, go back to that here, the pragmatic competence, how we get around that. If you can't really speak formally, you might just, one option you have, strategy is not to speak. We know that our students avoid difficult grammatical structures. That's a strategic option they have. We're not saying it's the best, but it's an option. Okay, and then of course we need to test whether not only can you speak English, the vocab, the grammar, the pronunciation, but do you know how to speak in different contexts? Because language is contextual. It is never devoid of context, and understanding how language changes in different contexts is a feature of spoken language. And finally, the interactional competence, I've put this in a different colour because it's a bit tricky to test in speaking, I'll tell you why later, is when there are 2 or more people in the game, then it's that turn taking, clarification, negotiation of meaning, etc., etc. Okay, so that is sort of skills that you will need. So you don't interrupt someone halfway through the word, which would be quite rude, but you might interrupt someone when their intonation goes down, where between, say, clauses where they're sort of inviting you to interrupt, for example. Okay, this is what we in testing call the construct. In other words, the skills and competences that we are trying to measure, assess in our tasks. All right, so let's go and have a look at some tasks. But before we do, let's look at some test formats. Testing is about choices we make. When we design tests, we have choices. Do I want a face-to-face test where the examiner is here and the candidate is here? Or do I want a semi-direct test where you see or hear a question and then you respond into a computer / mobile, iPad, okay, which is then downloaded, or so it's then recorded, downloaded and graded. Okay. Advantages, disadvantages, well, clearly face-to-face, some would say, is certainly more natural, although we could argue a little with what we're doing now because of the lockdown. We're talking a lot to computers, but in reality, face-to-face is always preferred because you can see the facial language, you can learn a lot, and you know, easier for asking for clarification, etc. if you don't understand the question. But of course, it adds costs. It's going to be very expensive, a face-to-face speaking test, as opposed to a semi-direct, which we could put many students in a room. They could take it anywhere in the world, so long as they have a computer. We don't need to bring the examiner. So there are advantages and disadvantages, obviously, of different formats. And in the individual candidate, so here's one examiner, here's a test taker, like IELTS, or like our friends in Cambridge, they have 2 candidates in some of their tests, a paired candidate. And again, there are advantages and disadvantages of both, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later when we see a paired candidate test task. So, okay, so we know what skills we want to focus on in our tasks, in our test or teaching tasks. What options do we have in these types of tasks? You can see some of the options here. I won't go through all of them, but obviously I'm going to touch on a couple and talk about why we use them and some of their benefits or disadvantages. But let me start with the first type of task. This is a read aloud task. This is from a test in Taiwan, the General English Proficiency Test I worked on for many years ago. And this here is for about, I don't know, 14, 15-year-olds, sort of intermediate age kids, intermediate sort of level kids. So basically, you read aloud. Okay, now let me give you my opinion on this type of task, everyone. This is not the opinion of the British Council, this is my opinion, and my colleagues in the testing department have different opinions on this. Some of them agree, some of them don't. So this is my personal opinion. I don't like these tasks. Why? A couple of reasons. The first reason is we never do this in real life. We never read aloud in real life. Unless you read a storybook to your children, then I hope you have a rabbit voice or a dog voice. This is not something we do in real life, and therefore I don't want to see it in the classroom because of negative washback, or certainly not in a test, which is my field. So why is it in a test? Well, here's the argument. You get the pronunciation. Okay, people then, you can hear people's pronunciation, intonation, blah, blah. Okay, that's an argument, but can I go back? Could I not get your pronunciation from an oral interview, describing pictures, in a role play, when you give a presentation, when you discuss? Well, of course I can. So that argument is out the window. So why do we have these tasks? Have a look where these tasks are, and you'll find mostly they're in tests that are scored by the computer. Why? Because the computer can score this. It's basically, in my opinion, it's not having real life tasks that we do in the real world so that the score for me is meaningful. It's about having a task that a computer can score. And that's a very dangerous, I think, idea. Again, as I said, a lot of my colleagues do not agree with me on this, but let's just go back. We're all teachers here. I've been a teacher for many years before I went into testing. I don't want a 14-year-old boy in a classroom practicing this. I want a 14-year-old boy doing questions and answers, giving a presentation, role playing, describing pictures, giving opinions. That's what I want. I don't want them reading text aloud. I just think that's negative washback. Okay, let's look at some other questions here. Well, this is for an A1 sort of level, and you'll hear this question. This is from our Aptis test. I use Aptis because obviously I work for Aptis and I design Aptis. You get 30 seconds, you hear a question, and then you respond. So let me give you an example. Tell me about the last time you went to a restaurant. Well, actually, yesterday I went to a restaurant. I went with my husband and my friend Rory from South Africa, and we went to a Chinese restaurant. It was lovely. We had duck, very tasty, a bottle or two of wine, and it was quite cheap. Very nice indeed. Okay, now I'm a native speaker. Was that very complex? No. Should I have used complex vocabulary? No. Therefore, I need rubrics or scoring criteria that fit in with the task. And that's that last point here at the bottom. Because sometimes I see rubrics where they have, say, 1 to 5, or, you know, a low level to high level, and the low level is simplistic vocabulary and grammar, high level is wide range of grammar and well, I don't need that to fulfill this task. And in fact, it would be unusual and weird for me to do that. If I said to you, if I answered that question like this, truth be told, it was an adventure that I ventured into the town. No, that's just bizarre. So therefore, that's really important when I talk about the features of speech at lower levels for unplanned informal speech. The rubric scoring criteria have to be at level-based, task-based, performance-based. Okay. Obviously, at a high level like B2, C1, then the task itself, we hopefully elicit a wide range of vocabulary and diverse grammar, and the rubric should show that. But at the lower level, this is not necessary. Okay, let's take a task from our friends Cambridge. They have a wonderful task here. It's an interactive paired candidate task. So it helps with the interactional competence. In other words, these tasks where you're just talking, there's only one person, but here you're in a paired candidate. So what you do is you have you talk together. So let me give you an example. Let's pretend I have a friend with me. Okay, I think to relax, a great way to relax is to cook. I love cooking. I don't think about work. I just get on with the food. Or I like to read because then it's nice and quiet. I can, you know, just really sit down comfortably. And my friend might say, oh, I don't agree with you. I think the best way to relax is to get out, go for a walk, get some fresh air, like, you know, fishing or a dog, walking your dog. And then I might say, okay, I can see your point, but okay, that's that interactive competence. Okay, and obviously only in a paired task like this can we measure that, can we elicit and measure that. But here's the problem. Testing is about choices. If I take a paired candidate choice, yes, I can tick interactive competence as one of the skills within that construct of speaking, but I have a slight problem. Again, always negatives and positives with everything we do in testing. The negative is what happens if I'm much better than the person I'm paired with. Then I have to lower my language so he or she can understand. Or worse, someone's better than me and then I'm intimidated and say little because they're so cocky and loud and they're talking all the time and I'm, oh. Or in some cultures, there's a gender issue, age and status issue, etc., etc. Okay, you can turn around and say, yes, but is the trade-off for intellectual competence worth it? And that is a very good question. And the answer is, there is no real yes or no to that. We take different tasks for different purposes. And certainly, obviously, our friends in Cambridge try to reduce all those negative aspects, but there's still the other issue that the examiner can lose control of the conversation. You might want to talk at a different topic, and then the examiner tries to bring you back. So there's loads of negatives and positives, but certainly for intellectual competence, such tasks are excellent. And certainly for classroom practice, fantastic, right? Because at the same level, you know your kids. Here's another one. This is sort of a B1 sort of task. We use pictures. Why? A couple of reasons. Pictures can elicit speech. We need to elicit speech to measure speech. And we don't want too much writing, and we don't want too much listening, because we don't want to influence the speech. If you don't understand the question, you may say something wrong, and then it's not the speaking that's poor, it's your understanding of what you're supposed to do. So how do we get about this? Well, you'll see these pictures. We try to obviously have pictures where people can talk about them. But if you notice here, and again, this is from our Aptis for Teens test, the task is a B1 task because it's asking you to describe, explain, hypothesize, speculate, reflect, which is a B1 skill in speaking. But the text here for the reading is A2 or below. We always have text, whether it's written or spoken, in speaking tests that are one level below the level we're trying to assess. Okay, so that we don't negatively influence the speech because they've misunderstood the written part, if that makes sense. So that's something we need you to figure out when you have speaking tests. We need to decide on what type of task and to try and make sure that there's no bias there. Okay, we're going to go up to a B2 task now. Here we can have a different rubric to the one we need for the A1, A2, just those personal questions, or even the task below, because here we're asking you to do planned speech. That's really important. We're giving you 90 seconds to prepare, 2 minutes to talk. Now, it's not totally planned because you're only going to probably plan the content, you know, what sort of ideas you're going to focus on and perhaps some of the vocabulary. But here is a great task where we can look at your pronunciation. Don't need to read anything aloud. We can look at your vocabulary, your accuracy, your fluency, how you manage your discourse management, the strategies you have to keep going, to think of content when you run out of things to say. So we can really look at most of those skills and competencies we want to measure with these sort of tasks. Now, as you notice, as we go up in level of CFR, we can sort of assess more of that construct of speaking. At the beginning stages of speaking, you're not going to have discourse management because you're not going to talk at length. You're not going to have strategies really, possibly a little if you're very, very linguistic minded, but we shouldn't really focus on that because you're just probably going to have a very narrow range of vocab and grammar. So as we go up the ladder in proficiency, we can start to include tasks that can measure a lot more of those skills and competencies. Okay, and in the last minute, I'm going to shamelessly promote a panel discussion which is occurring on the 20th of October. In February 2021, the British Council is holding an international conference on bilingual education. And from now until then, we are going to have a series of 10, 12 panels, events, workshops on assessment in bilingual plurilingual education, quality in bilingual plurilingual education, and inclusivity. Now, I'm obviously working on the assessment part, and we're going to start with a panel with 3 incredibly talented experts in the field, international and Spanish, one who's an expert in assessment, one who's an expert in comparing and contrasting successful education systems from around the world and their commonalities in assessment, and one who's an expert in working with content and English teachers to ensure assessment in bilingual education is according to the latest research, and focused. Okay, so they'll be talking. So please go to the British Council page, and I think it's going to be added to your notes as well. Okay, and just one half a second here. We've got a technical manual which you can find online in the Aptis research publications page, and in there you'll find all the specifications we have for our speaking tasks, and you'll see how, you know, for example, a B1 task here, what it looks like, what sort of functions we're focusing on, what sort of vocabulary. All of this is explained in the, you know, all these terminologies, etc., explained in this in the research book. So let me go back. It's the Aptis technical manual. You can Google it, and these are in the appendix. You'll see how we developed Aptis, and also gives you loads of information. And to be honest, if you want to design tasks yourself, where it's grey, keep as many as you can in there, or take whatever's necessary, and some of this you can keep for yourself, and you can design your own tasks. So thank you very much. I think now I'm going to take some questions, so I'll come off the yes. So from my colleagues have hopefully got some questions for me.
We have some questions for you. Thank you very much, Vicky. And if anybody wants to write some questions while Vicky's answering, then please do write in the Q&A. Something that you actually mentioned about artificial intelligence, but we had a question from Fiona, who said, to what extent would you say that speaking is the most complex skill to assess? And given some of the complexities that you've described, in your view, how feasible is it to assess speaking using artificial intelligence?
Okay, I'll give you my opinion here, and remember I have colleagues who may disagree with me slightly on the AI, but the first part I don't think anyone would disagree. In terms of complexity, speaking is obviously one of the most complex, if not the most complex skill, because of those elements I spoke about, that real life processing, that real time processing, the reciprocity aspect of it. Also, speaking involves listening in many respects as well, so there's an added element there. And of course there are different aspects of speaking. There's planned and unplanned, and loads more on that continuum. And again, it's because language is affected by context, and speaking, you know, me asking my friend for a pen is very different language for me asking my friend for $100 to borrow for a week or 2 months. Even though it's my friend, the same person, our language will be adapted, and it's that manipulation of language in speaking in real time often that causes such complexities. And of course, like with all language, and this is where AI gets a bit tricky, language is creative. At the early stages, not so much. Obviously, when we learn a language, we only have limited, but in reality, when I get to a certain stage, perhaps late B1, start to get into the B2, I can be creative and manipulate language. I can be funny, I can be rude, I can, you know, I can change as I wish for whatever purpose I wish. And that's where AI gets tricky. I can also say things, you know, an Irish colleague of mine, Irish testing colleague, always gives the example of James Joyce. A lot of his sentences, for example, in his book are 1 or 2, 3 words. Now, in AI, that short sentence in that written style will be marked as very basic, but it's not. He uses these short sentences for real emphatic and interesting reasons, if you know his work. So, and the same with speaking. There is no one way to say something. There are hundreds of ways to say the same thing, depending on my mood, who you are, if I like you. I mean, and the computer is not creative. I'm not saying it's going to be always the same. I mean, I think obviously AI is getting better and better. At the lower levels of proficiency, yes, I can see AI perhaps at A2 level, you know, picking up on vocabulary, grammar mistakes, things like that, because we're not really going for discourse management strategic at the very low levels. But for me, once you get past or the high end of B1, I personally don't believe, and I've never seen evidence of, computers being able to do that. What you'll find in computer scored tests is the tasks themselves are aligned to what the computer can score, hence the read aloud. It's not asking you to present for a long term, usually, because the computer, you know, or the rubrics they're scoring you are based on what the computer can do. You know, are there words that are in the semantic group of the subject? How many vocab mistakes did you make? How many grammar mistakes? Not the overall communicative effect of me perhaps showing, I don't know, a little bit dislike of the subject you've asked me to talk about, etc. There's so many things a computer can't score, and AI is not at the stage yet to be able to score creativity in language, and language is creative from B1 onwards.
Thank you. I wanted to nod and say yes, but I didn't want to break in. Sorry, I was listening. Somebody else has asked. They're an independent English teacher, and they've asked you where they could find some good assessment rubrics.
All right. Okay. Here's where it gets tricky. The best thing to do is not to look for rubrics, is to go back to the skills you want to test. Okay, so the first thing I would do is what do I want to test? If it's a low level, you might just want to do vocab and grammar and pronunciation, right? If it's like A2, your kids, or even lower. And then you want to look at a task in order to elicit that. And based on that, we sort of really need to look and design our own rubrics, because the rubrics have to be task focused. They have to be aligned to what we want to measure. I mean, you might just want to measure pronunciation in this particular assessment, but what level and what areas. So unfortunately, the answer is, it's not really about trying to find a rubric, it's about trying to design your own, so that they fit, there's a theoretical fit with what you want to test, and basically what aspects of that and what level. Now, if you just want to test general English proficiency, then yes, you spoken proficiency from, let's say, B1, B2, or from all ranges, then yes, you can find rubrics, say from high stakes tests like the IELTS bands. They give you the public version, gives you some understanding of the areas they focus on, grammar, vocab, and then there's that structure, that task fulfillment, etc. Fluency, or say aptis. Our rubrics are in our technical manual, and again they're task focused. So you can see rubric for A1, rubric for A1, A2, rubric for B1, rubric for B2. Go for high stakes tests. They've done the research, obviously. And again, it's also about adapting, not just adopting, but adapting, because some of the areas you might not be interested in actually assessing in your classroom test or assessment. So there's a lot of thinking involved in rubrics. It's not an easy question to answer. Apologies.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vicky. We've got to nearly 2:30. I'm sure you'd like a break, and everybody can rush off and have a little bit of lunch and then come back and join us this afternoon. There have been lots of very positive comments in the Q&A. People have been saying that the time has flown, they've really enjoyed it, and so thank you very much on behalf of everybody at TESOL Spain. And I just, British Council, heavens above, and I'd just like to remind people to take a look at the Padlet, and Vicky's PowerPoint will be there, and the address of the sessions that you mentioned. Okay, thank you very much, and wonderful. very informative. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
And you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.